All right, well, we have a lot to share, so let's go ahead and jump in. First of all, good afternoon and welcome to our LinkedIn Live discussion today, where we will be sharing some best practices about reducing customer effort, which we all know ultimately drives brand loyalty and value. So first, I'll introduce myself. I'm Pam Plyler, and I lead the customer experience and contact center practice for the Northridge Group. And we help our clients develop and implement strategies to create a differentiated customer experience and also achieve operational excellence. And I'm pleased to be joined today with two of my trusted colleagues who are also passionate about attaining customer experience excellence. And they are both with Tether, a leading AI-driven voice of the customer solution that leverages voice and text analytics to create deep business insights targeted to reduce customer effort and drive business outcomes. So first, I'd like to introduce Matt Dixon, who is the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Tether. Many of you know Matt as leading the charge on measuring, managing, and reducing customer effort. He's written many books on the topic, including The Effortless Experience. We're also joined by Ted McKenna, Tether's Senior Vice President of Research and Innovation, who will share his insights on customer effort analysis and best practices. So welcome to the discussion, Matt and Ted.
Hey, Pam, how you doing? Thanks for having us, and thank you to NRG for putting this on.
Yeah, excited for the discussion.
We are as well. So thank you for joining us. So first, let's start by really reinforcing how important it is to create an effortless experience for our customers. We know it's more important now than ever. It's been an area of focus for companies, and some progress has been made. But unfortunately, what we found in some recent research is that we have lost ground in the last year. So the fears from the pandemic, along with the transition to a remote work environment, has been very stressful, as we know, on everyone, right? Our customers, our employees, our business owners, and contact volumes are up substantially. It's because there's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace, and it's created a lot of long wait times for customers. We've probably all experienced it ourselves as consumers, right? And then lastly, our customer service specialists. Many of them are working from home for the very first time, and they find themselves without the support that they really need to provide really great service. So as a result, companies are really struggling more than ever to take care of their customers and employees, and are looking for ways to create a new normal and enable them to drive growth and success going forward. So our Northridge Group recently published our annual State of the Customer Service Experience report that really that assesses both customers and business leaders regarding the topic of ease of issue resolution, drivers of customer effort. So we'll be sharing those results with you today. And then separately, Tether also completed a comprehensive study of customer service calls last year, right as the pandemic had begun. So the analysis provided deep, valuable insights on what specific processes and service issues were driving the most effort for customers, and most importantly, what are the action plans that we can all take as business leaders to address it. So today's discussion, we're going to focus on the highlights from the research. We're going to explore differences between the effort perceived by customers and business leaders. And then finally, we're going to discuss really actionable best practices that can be leveraged to improve customer effort. So before we get started, I just want to welcome anyone to really put any questions or comments in the chat window. We absolutely look forward to your feedback. And of course, we want to respond to any questions that you have. So we will be posting a Q&A document on the event page. So keep your eye out for that. And let's go ahead and get started. So first, what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about contact volumes. And so as we think about this, sorry, getting the slides back up here. As we think about this, one thing that we've seen this year, it's been very consistent, both in the research as well as in our experiences with our clients, that volumes are up substantially, 30+%. And this is true across all channels and all most industries. Almost all industries are seeing a significant increase. So what that does is all that incremental volume is putting much more stress on the system, right? It makes it so much more difficult for the service teams to deliver and create that customer service experience that we're looking for. So the other thing to keep in mind is, as we do this research every year, you'll see that the significant increase in customers preferring digital channels, and we all know that as consumers, right? We know that the digital channels can be more flexible, they're always on, they'll provide faster service when they're designed properly. And unfortunately, though, in the past, given that many websites and mobile apps have historically been more difficult to use, or they lack the capabilities to really resolve a wide range of issues, customers felt that they had to call into the company to get their issue resolved and resolved quickly. So as you can see here, digital is on pace to meet or beat phone for being the fastest channel for resolution. It's really driven by two things. First, digital channels are getting much better. They're more intuitive and they're more easy to use, and companies are adding capabilities every day. As well as the phone channel, unfortunately, is becoming more difficult, especially during this last year where there's been so many different challenges. So now I'd like to open it up and ask Matt if he could kind of start the dialogue on sharing any ideas that you have with the group, what you're seeing in this digital shift, especially in this past year.
Yeah, no, happy to, Pam. It's so interesting. I saw this data a few weeks ago where we first started talking about doing this event together, and I was thinking about it. It's slightly different angle, but on the same question, which is where are customers going for service? If I take us all the way back to 2008, at that time, Ted and I were both part of a company called CEB, later became a part of Gartner Group, and we worked in the customer experience practice, customer contact practice. And one of the things we found all the way back in 2008, long time ago, is that almost 60% of inbound call volume was from customers who were first on a company's website. You fast forward to today. Now I know your data is slightly different angle, which is what is the easiest to use, the fastest channel. But if we look at where customers are actually going first, they're increasingly going to digital. In fact, the latest cut of the data that I've seen shows that almost 80% of customers, even if digital is not the fastest in their mind, maybe even if it's still getting beaten out slightly by phone, they still go there first. And so this is a secular trend that we've seen going on now for the better part of 10 years, that customers are shifting from live toward virtual, toward digital. Now, I think there's lots of reasons for that. I think people like the control of digital. They like the asynchronicity of it, the fact that they can multitask and solve problems at the same time. Hopefully nobody's doing that during this LinkedIn live session, right? But you can imagine in the other boring conference calls, you're going to be out for work later, you could multitask and solve problems at the same time. Digital allows us to do that. I think one of the other reasons too is that, let's be honest, the live experience for most companies hasn't changed a whole lot in I would argue 30 years. Where digital has grown up dramatically. I mean, the digital capabilities available today compared to even a year ago are just, leaps and bounds ahead, way more sophisticated, so much more power and control it gives the customer. So we've seen the secular trend happening. Now, I think with COVID, you're 100% right. It's not a new trend, right? Because we've been monitoring this for a long time now. But what happened was COVID kind of stepped on the gas pedal of this trend that was already underway. And you're absolutely right. In fact, there was an article I remember reading back in April of last year, right as we were kind of trying to get our heads around this whole environment we found ourselves in. And the article talked about how many companies had really reduced the amount of live service staff that could handle contact volume, right? So whether that's because they had to close down an offshore location or perhaps just lay off or furlough staff, but you had a lot of demand fitting through a narrower and narrower pipe. So when we as customers call up and we hear, hey, you're going to have to wait 2 to 3 hours to talk to a representative, well, what do we do? Do we sit and wait for 2 or 3 hours, or do we go try to solve the problem on our own? Well, we go to digital, right? And that's what we're seeing. So we're seeing this trend already underway, now shot through a tunnel of time by COVID. And as we're going to talk about later, when the customer goes there and doesn't have a great experience, that's bad news for a brand, right?
Yeah, I thought it was equally interesting. And the thing that kind of struck me actually in some ways was, I mean, no surprise the uprise in digital, and it's something, we're observing too, to Matt's point, in multiple different formats, whether it's in sort of an asynchronous or in some cases even a synchronous sort of chat situation that happens to be virtual. But also the other way to kind of look at that chart is that there's more staying power for a phone than I would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the number one channel, and especially the way it's worded in terms of this is the channel they prefer when they're looking for fast resolution. And so it starts to make you wonder if there are moments where certain channels are more preferable to customers than others. One might be in speed. Another thing we tracked at the beginning of kind of COVID, and I think it stayed true in general, is that in places where customers have high degrees of anxiety, and no doubt the pandemic brought that on, both in terms of health concerns, economic concerns, and so forth. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with that. But in those situations, we do find certain segments of customers preferring the phone too. And so it'll be an interesting thing to kind of observe over time how those things change. But in some ways, I think if you would ask people 5 years ago, would phones still be as high as it is, they probably wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I can remember back, this will date me, right? But I can remember back when email was the next big channel, right? And everyone said, well, now that email is a channel, phone's dead, right? And we're not going to need phone anymore. And what's happened is, and we'll see this in a minute, is the key is to have all of the channels, and they're going to go to the different channels for different needs at different times, right? Depending on how urgent it is or complex. And the key is for businesses to be in those channels, to be attentive, and to be able to resolve the issues effectively. Okay, so on that topic, let's go and chat a little bit about ease of use of those channels. So as we all know, as we just mentioned, right, they're going to go to the channel that they can use that resolves their issue in the quickest, easiest way possible. This data, it really highlights the disconnect between consumers and business leaders related to the ease of use of each of these channels. And as you can see, business leaders consistently rate the channels significantly higher. And we see this as well in our consulting work, because when we go in and do a digital assessment and an operational assessment, and we evaluate the channels, many times the business leaders are very surprised at the customer's experience. So this is clearly a wake-up call for business leaders to get more aligned with their consumers, close that gap, get more tangible information about what's really happening in their customer experience. And then the other piece I want to highlight here is when you think about, look at your digital channels, right? So the digital channels themselves are the gap is still significant, but look how low the ease of use is on these digital channels. I mean, it's poor at best. And I mean, to think about, only half of consumers are saying that the digital channels are easy to use when they are the norm. And to Matt's point, their customers are going there first. 70 to 80%, they're going there and they want to finish their request in that channel. So as we think through this, it's really important for us to understand each channel, what customers want and need out of that channel, and how are we delivering. So let's open that up for discussion relative to what you are all seeing in the digital space.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in that slide, Pam. I think the first thing I think that jumped out to me was, I think companies are all living in Lake Wobegon, right? Where they all think they're smarter and better looking than average, right? But it's I'm pandering to you, Ted, as a Midwesterner. So, but the reality is, when we actually take a harder look at the experience our customers are having, sometimes it's not so glowing, right? And it's not so positive. There is something here that's interesting as well. Sometimes companies will go out and measure satisfaction with some of those experiences, and they'll find that their customers are quite satisfied. But if you ask a slightly different question, which is, was it easy to use? Was it a low effort experience? Well, it doesn't make us look so bright and shiny and so positive anymore. And so it does matter a little bit what questions we ask. The other thing, the two other comments I'll make, I'll pull in Ted here, because I know he's got thoughts on this one as well, The one is, first, if you look at most of these digital channels, maybe with the exception of chat, are losing to email. And so if you're losing to email, you got a lot of ground to make up. That's like, and then the last thing I'll say is, you mentioned this before, Pam, and I think you're spot on. Previous research that that we were a part of, we found that, interestingly, companies approach digital from this perspective of every channel option, every tool we put in front of our customers for service needs to be equally good at solving every issue the customer might have. So if the customer wants to call, well, they need to have that same level of efficacy as if they open up a chat or send an email or go to the self-help portal or the knowledge base. What we know, though, from the research is customers don't think of channels as equal or fungible. So they don't think of channels as all doing the same job. It's different tools for doing the same exact thing. They could think of them as different tools to do different things. So what they think about it this way: think about the job that the customer's hiring that channel to do. And if you start all the way at the top, think about phone. Phone is the channel the customer hires, or the tool they pick out of their tool belt when they have a complex issue where nuance and context matters. I've got to talk to somebody about everything that's going on. They need to understand what I tried before. They need to understand this is the third time I've tried to solve this. It's the second time I've had to call about this. I updated the software, I'm getting this weird error message, whatever it is, but they need to explain themselves. Or maybe they just need to find somebody who's a bit more sympathetic than a machine, right? But that's where we go. That's the tool we hire in those situations. Think about email. Email for most customers is sort of a fire and forget communication. It's for, empty praise or criticism for which the customer expects no timely response, or maybe no response whatsoever. They're okay if it ends up in a black box somewhere. Then you think about other channels like social, which I think was down at the bottom of the list there. A lot of companies out there, and companies have won major, big awards and lots of recognition for their social customer service. But what's interesting is when we survey customers, we study what customers use social for. They don't use social to solve problems. They use social to spur companies into action. In other words, to publicly shame companies so that they can jump to the head of the line. Now, behind closed doors, some of those companies who've won these awards for their social service, what they'll actually tell you is, we're struggling to put the genie back in the bottle because we've inadvertently taught our customers, by being so good at solving issues and in addressing their needs in social, Twitter, Facebook, etc. We've inadvertently taught them that the way you get the best service and the fastest service from the best agents who can do whatever you want is by publicly complaining about us. Like, that is a really hard thing to undo. But okay, Ted, let me ask you to jump in.
No, you could say, that genie back in the bottle, that could be a whole separate discussion on social media and where the genie belongs and and all that stuff. But I actually think your point about email is interesting, because when I see that, I wonder if there's almost like an Amazon effect going on. Who's great at email is Amazon. And we all know this, especially now that, relative to 5 years ago, the competition we have from an experiential standpoint isn't just our direct competitors. It's the next tab over on the browser. And these brands like Amazon and Apple are setting the bar so high that you compare everything to that. And so when you go to use something like email, you expect it to be as easy as it is using email with Amazon. And I do think that probably drives some of this too. Obviously the big disconnect is the big takeaway there. And, executives and business leaders think everything's easy, which I think is interesting on its own. And it does call to question, what are they actually measuring to know whether it's easy or not? Because they're clearly missing that. The last thing I noted, though, is, 3 of the bottom 5 ones are channels where no human agent was involved, right? So these are social media where they're throwing it over the fence, or an app where they're trying to self-serve, or a website they're trying to self-serve, which isn't to say that those things are wrong. But I do think there's a lesson there as we think about what customers consider to be easiest, and the role that humans may continue to play, even beyond that. And we have customers that spend a lot of time, when they use those types of automated channels, using live interaction data and the experiential learnings from them to train those bots and other types of automated tooling, such that at least they imitate the human experience in a more effective manner. Maybe that's part of kind of making those experiences easier.
Yeah, I'll build upon that, Ted, and kind of also share, thinking about each of these channels and the human engagement that you just mentioned, right, is so critically important, because when they are calling in, sometimes that voice channel is the only opportunity for those consumers to interact and engage with the brand. So what we've found are some clients who have maybe pushed the envelope too far on self-service are actually trying to pull that back as well, because they're now missing the opportunity to create that differentiation and to demonstrate the brand value that they have. So it's become more commoditized from a product perspective.
Mm.
And as we all know, right, especially last year, we've seen a significant shift in moving more of the sales activities to not a field sales activity, because people are working completely virtual. So again, that opportunity to identify what are the other products and services without, and it being more of a solution oriented selling process is more important than ever. And that's where you get that from that engaging channels, whether it's live voice or live chat.
There is also sort of a separate thing, Matt. I know you've done a lot of thinking and research on this too, is just, how much of is it good to sort of be all things to all customers and trying to serve them through all these different channels when they're just going to be sort of have varying levels of happiness with those? Is it better kind of specialize in specific ones where you can nail it and nail those expectations, versus trying to just be present in every possible place the customer can reach you?
Yeah, the what I'd say on that, you're spot on, Ted, is for some, I think for companies, we should be honest, even if they found out they're really awful at something like chat, nobody's going to shut it down after they've already, spun up the investment and trained reps to handle chats and concurrent chats, and they made the business case to finance and all this stuff. And now there's some customers using it. Nobody's going to shut it down, but it does suggest that we should really take a hard look at all these channels. One of the things, and think about what are they best suited for? Which issues are they best at solving? One of the things we talked about in the Effortless experience was this idea of what we call an issue to channel mapping exercise. So think about the issues your customers contact you about, irrespective of channel. What are the most common issues? And then what are the channels that you offer those customers? And then go through and literally grade each of the channels for how good it is at solving each of those issues. And what you're going to find is some of the channels, they knock it out of the park. They're awesome for solving certain issues, but they're not so good at solving other issues. Chat is a great example, or SMS, this asynchronous messaging, can be really good at some things and actually really terrible at other things. And then the question to ask ourselves as companies is, are we making that explicit to our customers? So when a customer shows up at our website or self-help portal, are we, or our customer service tab on our website, are we telling them based on a little bit of information, hey, if this is your issue, this is the best way to solve it, versus if something else is your issue, here's a different way to solve it, right? Are we making recommendations and being more prescriptive? Or are we just kind of sitting back and saying, we're going to let our customers figure it out for themselves? And if we know some of those are going to be bad decisions, then we really should be telling the customer before they spin their wheels and make a bad choice.
That's right. And that's also where kind of the seamless integration of those channels comes into play, right? If I am in a live chat session with my customer and I can see it's more complex, make it easy, click to call in and just make that recommendation, easily transfer it over, and I pick the call up right from where I left off. I think, when you look back 5 years or so ago, or even 2 or 3 years ago for some companies, that's, I'm sorry, you're going to have to call in, and I hang up and I have to call right back in. So those pain points are so important to understand. And we'll talk about measurement in a little bit, and really listening to your customers on where those friction points are and addressing them head on. And I know, Ted, we have a slide here I'll pull up from your research that I wanted to include because I thought it was really insightful, which is, as you think about the digital channels, right? Understanding if they're going to the digital channels first, what are some of the most common things that fail, and for a password reset, right? And even there, it's like the front door is even closed, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
you
exactly.
talk a little bit about this.
It does make you wonder, why do they even have to go so far as to call in about a password issue? That's definitely something good. But as you see in the slide, that was a quarter of, in a recent sort of snapshot we did, of the types of issues customers were experiencing in self-service failure situations. So when they have to switch away from some digital a channel and now call into the call center and say, hey, I'm trying to do this type of thing, these are the issues that bubble to the top in terms of how frequent they are, but with a particular lens using this algorithm we have called the Tether Effort Index. So what we're measuring for are not that all the things that ever happen, but rather what types of things are particularly frustrating for customers that drive high degrees of anxiety, and they perceive effort in a way that makes it far more likely that not only they're going to go tell all their friends about how bad that experience was, and you could expect if they're having to call you about their password issue, perhaps they're not going to visit that site anytime soon, but also churn out. And so that's what we look to measure with the Tether Effort Index. And I think, as you look across the list of things here, a lot of them are rather pedestrian in terms of the types of things you would expect to self-serve on, executing a payment, inquiring about a bill, and so forth. And of course, some of this will differ a little bit based on the customer segment and kind of what they're doing. But these are all things in some ways kind of surprising, because you would expect these to be kind of center plate type issues that a self-service channel, a website, for instance, especially nowadays where we put lots of investment in there, it would be sort of easily dispensed with. But customers are still struggling with these things, and when they have to go so far as to call in and tell us about it, it makes it feel like almost like in some ways it's like a repeat contact, but it's like a repeat resolution situation. I'm now twice having to deal with this, and it was something that should have taken 10 seconds.
It's just to jump on that, this is really interesting, and I think Ted's right. These are I was going to say fastballs. They might even be like slow pitch, balls right down the heart of the plate. We should be knocking these out of the park, and yet our customers are still struggling on digital to solve for some of these things, and they're causing a lot of digital frustration, which then manifests when they have to pick up the phone and they call. An interesting thing, though, just to point out here, this data. Sometimes customers ask us, we're in the conversational analytics space, so we're taking at Tether, we're taking recorded phone conversations, chat interactions, any conversational data with our customers, and using that to understand what's going on with the customer experience, the website experience, the product experience, the agent experience. And what's interesting is a lot of times people ask us, well, how do you guys figure out if the customer left the website because they had a payment failure situation, or because they're struggling to reset their password or to authenticate via the website? And the way you figure that out, the way you figure out what's frustrating your customers in your digital channels, is you listen to the phone calls that happen after they leave your digital channels. And what you find is that's a gold mine, right? We always think of recorded phone calls as being great for quality assurance and improving what our agents say and do. But many of us have never stopped to think about that is a place where our customers complain about the stuff they were doing before they had to pick up the phone to call. Hey, I was on your website, and I got to tell you, by the way, this happened to my wife and I with our bank yesterday, where we couldn't get into our bank account to send a bill. She reset the password. I think I reset her password, and then we were like locked out, and we had to wait on hold. And by the time we got on there, we're like, this is so frustrating. We should be able to do this online. Why do we have to wait on hold for 20 minutes to talk to a representative about this? And a very nice and competent, apologetic representative, but it was frustrating, right? But think about it, that call was recorded. That bank now has our feedback about what went wrong in that digital channel that caused that high effort experience. I want to say one other quick thing. You mentioned, Pam, before this idea of these channels integrating. I think we're kind of emerging from this world of multi-channel, right? Which is each of these channels as a standalone experience for the customer. That old world you described of you're in a chat interaction and the rep says, sorry, you're going to have to call, and then you have to call and basically start over again. That's kind of the multi-channel world where those channels aren't integrated. And we're moving into the omni-channel world where you're in a chat session with the agent, and the agent serves up a link and says, hey, Ted, hey, Pam, can you click on that? And that's going to connect us in a voice connection, a phone connection, if you will, click to call, what have you, so that I can authenticate and we can get this payment process for you or get this order placed. That is something that, just a few years ago was kind of pie in the sky. We weren't seeing it a whole lot, but I think now that is increasingly, you're starting to see companies get this right. Companies like in Amazon, as Ted said before, and that is resetting the bar for everyone else. And so what used to be good enough, which was good multi-channel presence or performance, efficacy, is now the bar has been raised to now starting to think about omni-channel. And we're going to talk more about that, I know, as we get into this discussion.
Yeah, excellent point. And only one other thing I'll add on to that is thinking about the outbound, right? So personalization and the word of caution that we have whenever we help our clients in designing these solutions is be really cautious about the outbound activity, because our consumers are now in the driver's seat. They're choosing what channels they want to come in on. And the outbound, you don't want to kind of abuse it the way we've abused email. That's why email is kind of becoming a dying channel, with the exception of like B2B environments. But in your outbound communications, if you know someone has been locked out and you send them a proactive link, you know, based on your activity, their behavior, that they are locked out of their system. So sending a link to them on how to reset, and they click on it, they put a security question in, and then they're in, is awesome. It's relevant, it's timely, and it's easy, right? The only word of caution is be cautious not to abuse that outbound channel, right, for things that are in your best interest versus your customer's best interest. So just kind of a word of caution for the audience as well. All right, so now let's turn our attention to the voice channel. So when you do call in, first contact resolution, right, is something that businesses have been measuring for some time. Now, I'll share from our perspective, many businesses are still measuring it only through surveys when they have the data readily available to assess whether or not someone has called back in, whether that's using your ANI data. So we call it an operational first call resolution measurement. You know they've called back either through your CRM or through your ANI data. Use that information, create an operational FCR measurement for your business, because it's critical. Once they've called in once, they want it to be one and done. So, but here's kind of what the research is saying. First of all, FCR has been a focus for companies for years, and we've made some good, steady progress. Actually, in 2018, when we did this survey, the results were 38%. So customers were perceived to have resolved their issue on the first contact only 38% of the time in 2018. So we were thrilled when we saw the results of 53% in 2019, because we knew companies were really focused on it. So now here's the bad news, right? All of that progress that was made between 18 and 19, almost all of it has been offset by this challenging year. We all know what a challenging year 2020 was. However, we're now back down to 42%. So this is a kind of a call to action for all businesses to double down our efforts in really focusing on first contact resolution and ensuring that once it's in there, your associates and your business processes enable those issues to be resolved on the first time. And I know, Matt, you and Ted recently published an article in the Harvard Business Review kind of highlighting the drivers of these multiple contacts. You want to share with the team a little bit of what you found there?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things here, and then go over to Ted. But the first thing I would say is this very similar to the slide we saw a bit earlier from the NRG research, showing the disconnect between how companies think they are doing on those channels and how customers think they're doing. I would argue, and I've seen this data, that most companies would say 38% in 2018, 53% down to 42%. All of those numbers in the eyes of companies are bad. They think they're up in like the 70s or 80s when it comes to first contact resolution. Again, another example.
Still half your customers have to
call. It's another example of this Lake Wobegon effect. What we found in research around the Effortless experience is that there's always been this disconnect between companies and customers. I think in our research, we found that companies thought they were about 75% effective when it came to one and done first contact resolution. Customers thought it was like 40%. And what we determined was that, not surprisingly, customers and companies define what is an issue and what does resolve that really mean in very, very different ways. And Pam, you're 100% right. The better way, we argued, to measure success at first contact resolution is actually not asking your customer at the end of the call, have I fully resolved your issue today? Because oftentimes the customer doesn't know. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they're going to install that software that you told them to install, or install that upgrade or that patch, and then they're going to get another error message that's going to force them to call back. And so the better thing to do is measure callback rates. And when you measure callback rates, again, it's not a beauty contest. Your success rate is going to look a lot worse. But that is the customer-centric way to measure how good of a job we're doing. Because it stands to reason. It varies by industry. For some industries like financial services, banking, I'd say 24 to 72 hours is the right callback window. For insurers, it might be 7 days. For a utility provider or a cable operator they're on a monthly billing cycle, it might be 30 days. But if we can reasonably assume that a customer that had to call back multiple times within a defined time period is probably calling back about the same issue or something related to that same issue. So we need to think not just about how do we solve this customer's issue now, but how do we forward resolve the issue they might call back about, right? How do we think more expansively in a customer-centric way about all the things that are connected to the thing they called in about? That's the first point. The second point I would say is it's not surprising to see the dip in 2020. I think a lot of that was driven by the fact that you had a lot of reps, and Pam, you talked about this before, grew up in the friendly confines of the contact center, surrounded by tenured colleagues and subject matter experts and tier 2 folks and supervisors and QA staff and coaches. And, it's like safety nets upon safety nets. And so if I ever encountered an issue I couldn't solve, I mean, I could just reach out and tap somebody on the shoulder and ask for some help. You can't do that when you're working from home. And so now agents find themselves on an island and they're struggling. And I think what that is really saying, that's kind of an indictment of the fact that we haven't done a great job equipping our people to be successful on their own. Maybe they've grown up in an environment, maybe we hired incorrectly, or maybe they just grew up in an environment where they just expected people to give them the answers. And now when they're in an environment where they have to use their own judgment and figure things out on their own, that's tough. I'd say the other thing, and they're struggling, as the data suggests. The other thing is that I think during the COVID environment, companies were a little slow to catch up around some of the demands or requests customers were making. So, we may have had, if I'm a utility provider, like a 7-day or 10-day grace period to pay your electric bill in an environment where so many customers are calling with real financial hardship, where they don't know when they're going to be employed again. And they know for darn sure they can't have their power go out, because then it's going to be really hard to surf the internet to find a new job. So they need the power to stay on, and they're asking the rep, I'm going to need more flexibility here. I might need you to give me a 30-day or 60-day grace period. I don't know when cash is going to be flowing into my bank account next. And reps are just, there's nothing they can do, right? Because the company hasn't updated their policy. And so we wrote about that, Ted, last year with some of the COVID research and what we found. But yeah, I find this is a fascinating thing. Again, a disconnect between companies and customers that I'm seeing accelerate.
For a long time, Matt, remember, we used to always talk about how, part of the reason that FCR remains a struggle is because the types of issues that get into the contact center increasingly are more complex. And that relates to the digital trend, where you would think a lot of the more easy stuff is getting resolved. But then you see some of the data that's driving, some of those channel switch situations and not the most complex situations in the world. And so I think at least a big chunk of this, frankly, is just agents just kind of going through the motions. We have a way to measure this too. And we look at the Tether Effort Index in our specific agent-related score called the Agent Impact Score. The way it's designed is meant to sort of look for places when either the agent's making it worse or potentially making it better. No surprise, you get a lot of interactions that kind of fall in the middle. The agent's kind of just doing what they've been asked to do. They're following the script. Customer asks for one thing, they do it, they hang up. We've been surprised at just how many of those, though, just end in those situations. And you've run into all these situations where the agent could have went that next step, could have provided that next piece of guidance, and just doesn't, whether because they're not incentivized to do it or because they don't think to do it and aren't trained to do it. Either way, you see this chunk of, and for us on the scale of 0 to 10, a lot of calls in kind of that 5 to 6 zone where agents just kind of going through the motions. And so I think until and unless we address that, we're never going to close that gap from, whether you call it 42 or 51, either way, it's about half our customers. So I think it really does come down to making sure our agents are equipped and going that extra mile, which sometimes isn't even that much extra effort. It's just, hey, think about what other issues they call about. Make sure you recommend that before you hang up.
That's right. Well, and I think that is clearly cultural, right? And really setting the expectation of, I think, Matt, certainly you hit it right. Am I hiring the right people that have that troubleshooting mindset? Have I adjusted for the fact that all my transactional work, to your point, Ted, has been, automated? So now these are much more complex and higher level of empathy is needed. And then the culture piece is really all about, and we've focused a lot over the last year in helping our clients re-engineer their training programs, because what we find is that's where it starts. When they come in that front door, even if I have a culture of customer centricity, if the training is, I'm going to teach you how to do every activity, and not put it in context. You're not sharing the end-to-end experience, or you're not sharing the context. Healthcare is a great example. Does this member services associate understand the broader end-to-end process from the provider to the payer to the back office claims group? Because if they don't understand that, then their hands are tied. They can't troubleshoot to the level that they need. And the training also is all about, training and knowledge management is all about giving them the tools that they can go look up information. So instead of 80% of the training being what to say and how to follow process, how to do it in the system, it needs to be 80%. Here are the scenarios that you're going to get. Here's what some of the options are. Here are the unusual, scenarios. Don't just teach me on Happy Path, and then show me where to go find it in the knowledge management solution or other tools to go get the specifics that you used to train me on. So that's been a huge shift in the last year.
One last, that just reminded me that, there's actually 2/3 of effort is about the perception. It's about sort of the way in which the customer feels about those situations. So take that complex situation, even in those cases when the agent's hands are tied or they don't actually know the answer. We know that there are specific ways to handle those situations, and certain language patterns just pour gasoline on the fire. So you take this bad situation, customers already upset about, maybe it's the second time they've had to call it, an agent just makes it 10 times worse because all they talk about is what they're not able to do and how they aren't able to handle it. And so those are situations where you're trying to just, make it worse, basically, right?
That's right. Well, and I've got the gasoline of all gasolines. It's been my pet peeve for decades, of when an associate hasn't been able to resolve the issue. It's still outstanding. You're frustrated that it wasn't resolved. And what do they ask at the end of the call? Is there anything else I can help you with? Right?
Yeah, you can solve the thing I called you about.
That's right. It's like you're going to get a mouthful at that point, at least for me, which is you never solved what I called in about.
Hey, but they can check the QA box and they ask the question.
That's exactly right.
What you might get is no, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's a good point, Ted, as you talk about kind of the quality processes as well. What we find, and we have within Northridge, we do third-party analytics and quality monitoring. And what we find is that when we go in and help our clients re-engineer their quality programs, we are taking it from a check the box, I'm trying to get the scores, or punitive, you're going to detract from a score, to what's the intent? What am I trying to solve for? And at the end of the call, it's clarity. It's what are the next steps? It's, creating that level of confidence. It's not just saying these words. And if you're giving credit for those words, then your quality program is not measuring what matters to your customers.
Yeah, totally.
Right. We I love that idea. And that's a real shift. I think there's a fundamental shift I think we're seeing happen. It goes back to something Ted, you said before, which is as the easy stuff goes away and we get better at digital and customers can solve the routine issues on their own, what ends up with the live agent, unless you're a company where customers can't fix their password issues on the website. But what happens with the live agent is they end up with the more complex issues. And so in that world, and this goes to Pam, we were talking about with QA, how do we think differently about, we've got to leave the old model, which is running our contact center like a factory floor, which was looking for defect, right? Did you say the customer's name 3 times? Did you thank her for her loyalty? Did you, acknowledge and, smile through the phone, and these kinds of things that QA has measured for years and years and years. We're now in a world where customers are calling about those complex issues, those things where there's nuance and there's context and they're multifaceted. And sometimes they're issues we've never heard before, right? In that world, the companies that win are the companies that actually don't tighten the screws, but they actually take a step back. They think about, how do I hire great people, give them the tools, the technology, the training, the coaching they need to be successful, and not do checklist oriented kind of, did you say these words QA, but more competency based QA. Am I teaching people the behaviors that I know are going to lead to more successful outcomes for our customers? That's a fundamental shift in just the way we think about people. There were 2 articles that we wrote in HBR. One was called Kick-Ass Customer Service, where we looked at different profiles of reps. And we found the winning profile today, the low effort rep, is the one we call the controller, who really demonstrates their subject matter expertise. They set the customer's mind at ease that you've reached, by luck of the draw, the smartest person in the contact center who's seen this issue 100 times today already, and they are going to solve it for you. And you're thinking, thank goodness, because I tried this on my own. I made a mess of things. I spent an hour on the website. I was looking at YouTube videos. I can't figure this out. And now I've got a subject matter expert. And then, but if we hire those subject matter experts, if we hire really well, what kind of environment are we going to put them in? Because they don't thrive in an environment of scripts and checklists and handle time clocks and stuff like that. They thrive in an environment where they're allowed to exercise their judgment. That's, you've got to unleash those people to deliver a great customer experience. So you're right. I mean, these are really big questions around talent and culture that companies have to wrestle with.
Excellent. Excellent discussion. So let's kind of pivot now a little bit to measurements, right? So as we think about, as you just described, having the culture, having the infrastructure in place, one of the most important things is measurements. How do they feel like they're supported in order to make those right decisions with the consumers? So here's a question that we ask in our research about how businesses measure customer service effectiveness. And you'll see, the common customer satisfaction, right, which generally comes through surveys. And unfortunately, as we all know, surveys are very low volume, sometimes give a skewed perspective. And many times the feedback that comes out of the surveys are going to be very tactical and about that interaction, and may not be able to be extrapolated to your entire population of customers. And then you've got behavioral metrics in here, right? Customer loyalty, that would be about repurchasing. You've got customer lifetime value, churn, and those are great outcome measurements, right? What's the customer behavior and am I driving more business and or loyalty with them as well? And then you'll see customer effort right in the middle. And while there's been some increase in usage of customer effort, I'm frankly really surprised and disappointed that it's still only at 29%. I mean, the amount of research that has been done, thanks to Matt and others like him, that have really come out and done the correlation analysis of, if you reduce effort, you're going to drive customer loyalty, you're going to drive repurchase, you're going to drive referrals, and frankly, you're also going to reduce your own internal costs, because the more you reduce that effort, the less touch points, non-value touch points that you have in your organization. So it's a very, very powerful way to really get underneath of what the opportunities are and really target your action plans. The other thing I'll say here is, this is another reason why I think when you go in, you see that gap between the business leaders and the customers, is because they really don't have line of sight. They're only looking at that endpoint, and they're not looking at the tangible things that they can actually influence. So what are your thoughts overall about just overall measurement?
Well, I think the measurement question's a big one. I'm a personal believer. So Ted, I'm going to steal shamelessly from what you said when you saw this. I was more pessimistic. Maybe I said, well, of course they measure this stuff because that's what their bonuses are based on, But and like we talked about, measuring customer effort is not a beauty contest. It doesn't make you look great sometimes to see how hard you are to do business with as a company. Ted looked at that. I think, Ted, what did you say, that customer effort was the only one that went up of all those metrics, which is, is a totally glass half full view. And I think that's positive. What the thing I would say is, I don't know that. And sometimes I think people read the Effortless experience or some of the work around it will conclude that what we're trying to set up is a religious debate around metrics. Is it customer effort score versus net promoter score versus CSAT? In some respects, in retrospect, I would say we did that to ourselves. But I think what I learned is that you don't need to have a religious debate around metrics. You need to ask lots of questions of your customers. You need to collect a lot of operational data. I think we're moving, though, away from this world of like, what's the question I should ask in the survey, to the bigger question that you hit on, Pam, which is, should I be using surveys as the primary way to understand the customer experience, especially in a world where survey response rates are on a secular decline? And we talk to big companies all the time who tell us that they're happy to get an 8 or 9% response rate on their surveys on a good day. And they spend millions of dollars trying to deploy surveys, and they hammer their customers with post-call surveys, after they visit the website with pop-up surveys, surveys in the chat interactions, et cetera. And they get a very, very low response rate. And then it's only a subset of those customers who actually take the time to type in, here's why I gave you the score I did. Here's what you can do to improve. And then, as you said, Pam, sometimes that stuff is really tactical. It's very hard to extrapolate to a broader population or a broader set of experiences. And so what we found is the better way to understand the experience is to actually harness all of the unstructured data you've got sitting around your company, call recordings, chat interactions, email exchanges, case management data is just sitting there, and the technology exists now to understand what the customer's experience is at a much deeper level with a much bigger sample without having to ask your customer to go fill out a survey, which, as somebody pointed out to me a year or two ago, is like one of the guys who came up with customer effort score said, hey, smart guy, did it ever dawn on you that it's a high effort experience to ask your customer to fill out a survey to tell you how much the effort the experience was? And I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good point. So, so the point is that, look, this bar is going up too. If you are a company out there that is primarily relying on surveys as your window into the experience you are delivering, understand that the tide is shifting there, in leading companies are actually, yes, they're still using surveys to triangulate in specific use cases with specific types of customers, to close the loop after they find out from unstructured data that there's been a bad experience. But they're more and more harnessing that unstructured data to get a much deeper perspective on what the actual experience is, and importantly, how to get better.
Yeah, relatedly though, also is, let's put aside, whether something like churn or loyalty or satisfaction are important. Of course they are. The better question is, what's the best possible way to measure those outcomes, particularly in settings like a transactional contact center, where I'm looking at the types of things happening and the issues that are presenting to them and how much friction we're creating from them. And I think, I look at that data and then I see earlier that there's this disconnect between how easy leaders think it is. I can't help but wonder, one of the reasons they're not measuring is because they just think they already are easy. And of course, what we're seeing from customers is that's not the case. And so we need to step up our game in terms of how we're going about doing that and how frequently we are measuring, almost independent of whether it's a survey or other type of mechanism. Of course, Tether has a point of view on the best possible way to do it. But at the end of the day, if we're not asking our customers, we're not getting that insight into, to what extent are things easy, you can that's just going to persist, that disconnect, and our customers are going to be, upset. We shouldn't be super surprised then when customers walk out the door and go to that next easiest interaction. And I'll tell you another thing, and I experienced this as a consumer too. In some respects, the switch isn't necessarily because that next experience is easier. You just assume it might be, and this other one's been so terrible. And because it's so easy now to switch, why not? Let's give it a try, right? So it's almost like that's the one thing you can control, is make sure it's easy, such that you don't have to deal with those situations. You never have to worry about when those customers have that thought in their mind. And of course, with something like Tether, you can be proactive in those situations when that does happen, and make sure that you're getting to those customers before they make that switch, and finding ways to fix those situations. And that actually is a great place that surveys can play a role in sort of following up in those situations where you've detected this type of effort. But again, sort of almost irrespective of channel, let's make sure we're at least measuring it on a more frequent basis.
That's right. Well, and I think it's also, as you shared, kind of the tides are turning because you have this wealth of information. And I think we've got to release ourselves of the mindset, or business leaders of the mindset, that the metric is meant to make us look good. The metric is meant to identify where the pain points are, what are the issues that we need to address so that we can continuously improve. And having that measurement does several things, right? Not only does it point you to your priorities and the things that you need to action on, gives you very specific things that need to be fixed, like you showed in your other graphic, but it also allows you to measure the impact once you change those things. If you're relying on surveys or outcome measurements, it could take 6 months to start seeing that trend improve. So real time, I've made a change. I'm looking at my analytics and I'm seeing it that it's improving real time, week over week, or month over month, is powerful. So what we've done is we within Northridge, we leverage Tether for a lot of our quality analytics, because that tells us where to fish, right? So if we're running calls through the Tether solution, and then it identifies where are those pain points, targets in, then our quality monitoring analyst specialists that go deep, they'll listen to, instead of listening to 5 calls per associate per month, right? They're going in and saying, oh, I have this business problem I need to solve. Let me go put human listening on it, and that can really troubleshoot, identify root cause, and identify action plans, so that when we do turn around action plans, we are confident that they're going to move the needle and drive strong ROI for our clients. So with that, let's also now share as we begin to close out, okay, what should our priorities be? I know we had, so as we think about prioritizing your initiatives, right, we know that you should be using data-driven quantification processes. This is one of the research questions, which is, what are your top 3 priorities? And it's fascinating to see that from the customer's perspective, it's all about the basics. Resolve my issue, give me a knowledgeable person, and be available for me. Very, very basic. Prioritize easy and fast service. Whereas your business leaders, because they have that false sense of security that they're better than they are today on some of the basics, they're focused on kind of those differentiators, which clearly are important, but are secondary. You're not going to get credit for doing a differentiator if your foundation's not broke, or if your foundation's not working well. So I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but anything to add on prioritization and call to action?
Yeah, I would just say this is it's a shame we're doing this at the very end, because my favorite slide in the whole Northridge study. It's just the talk about disconnected is so. There's a couple of things I would conclude. One is they're they're totally different, stating the obvious. But the second thing is, as you said, Pam, the customers, what the customers are looking for us to be better at and to invest in and to prioritize, it's kind of pedestrian stuff, right? It's pretty straightforward stuff. We're all looking at those shiny pennies. We're looking at omni-channel. We're looking at 24/7, 365 service. We're looking at personalization and these kinds of things. And that's not to say that any of those things are bad, but we should ask ourselves, have we gotten the basics right first? Have we made it easy and efficient for our customers to get resolution around their issues? And if we have, great. Then let's look at personalization, and let's look at differentiating and layering on top and playing some offense there. But you really should ask yourself, is your defensive house in order? And for many companies, as old colleague of mine used to say, there's food for many winters in terms of making things easy for our customers, and we're all guilty of making things hard. But that is a big difference. And I know, Ted, when you saw that list, I think you saw a sort of technology versus people story. But I'll let you have the last word here.
Yeah, no, I was going to say something similar about the offense defense, but yeah, I mean, it's clearly all the things on the right are things that we often rely on human agents for. It sounds weird for me to call them humans, but people, right? These are people on our teams, on our floor, who are having these types of conversations at the front line. And as we've shown, there's still customers who prefer that, and for good reason. It's fast, it's efficient, and they find it to be very accessible. And so let's not look askance at that just because we think the other thing is cool, or that there's opportunity there, because there is, of course. But nonetheless, if we're falling down on those situations now, and moreover, we're not supporting our teams who aren't going away anytime soon to handle these situations, we're going to continue to sort of let them run up, our opponents run up the scoreboard, because we're just not playing that defense.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so in closing, first of all, we hope you enjoyed the discussion today, and clearly the data says and confirms that this is a call to action, right? Call to action for business leaders to take that outside in view and look at your customers, get aligned with their perceptions, review your end-to-end processes, use the analytics and the tools that are available to you to really go deep and work on the things that matter most to your customers. So we thank you on behalf of the Tether and the Northridge team for joining our LinkedIn Live discussion today. We encourage you to reach out. Yeah, we're available on, of course, all of the social channels, and Twitter, Facebook, and of course, LinkedIn. And as we mentioned earlier, whatever questions you've posted in the chat, we will be posting these. So kind of keep an eye out for those. And we value your feedback. So any and all feedback is welcome, because we would incorporate that feedback into our next session. Feedback is a gift. And we hope to see you back for our next event. So hope you all have a great day.